A viewer asked me about the content of one of the records that is in the intro, and I am embarrassed to say I didn't know. So I decided to find out. Turns out it's really cool, and I'll share it with you today on the 78 RPM channel. Hello, and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. Whether you're new to 78s or an advanced collector, this is your source for information, research, and music about 78 RPM records, cylinders, and radio transcriptions. Hey gang, and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. A viewer named Dominic asked me about the content of the Columbia personal record that I use in the intro, and as it turns out, I didn't know. Now, you are well aware I play every record I get, and so there has to be a story behind it. I acquired that record literally hours before I left Texas and moved to Tennessee. That record went from somebody's hands to my hands into the back of the truck, and I never got around to listening to it. I did, however, scan it so I could use the really cool label in the intro. Well, I guess it's time to find out what it is. Now, the disc itself is a Columbia personal record. It has the number 33708 in the runout area around the really nice Columbia buff purple personal record label. Now, this helped me exactly none, as I couldn't locate that matrix in any existing documentation. Apparently, the 33,000 matrix numbers were reserved for in-house test pressings, promotional discs, and personal recordings. The information on the label itself wasn't much help either. It contains the phrase Board of the Junior Assembly under the made by notation on the label, and the date says February 28, 1916, which we are about to discover is in fact not the recording date. The area where the title would normally be written contains the phrase transferred from the original for Sidney Berney. Now, this actually did help because Sidney Berney could easily be identified as the former owner of the Hamburger's clothing store chain. There was a huge store in Baltimore as well as stores in other major cities. Given the fact that Mr. Berney was a patron of the arts, I braced myself. Here comes another really bad baritone singing a schlocky parlor song accompanied by a bad piano. However, I suppose that means it's time to play it. So I played it, and this is what I got.
The Caliph of Baghdad, Harun al-Rashid, the Prince of Egypt, the Viceroy of India, the Emperor of Japan, and the Emperor of China issue jointly to you this royal proclamation. Behold, you are commanded by Allah, Muhammad, and Buddha under the fear of death to appear on the 9th of February the 28th, 1916, promptly when the hour strikes 9 at the inn of the Belvedere of Baltimore. Then there will be revealed to you all the wonders and the splendors of the Far East, and with other chosen mortals, you will spend happily a few hours in the Orient. Royalty will be at your command, but to please their majesties, the rulers of the East, you and your lady must be costumed in such apparel as the subjects of their countries regularly wear. Upon this, their highnesses insist With keen anticipation, they await you. Sila.
Now, I don't know if that was the voice of Sidney Berney or not, but whether or not he recorded it, he probably financed it. And in that era, that would have been a pretty pricey proposition. The cost of recording and mastering and pressing and then mailing out a bunch of 78 RPM records as invitations to a party would have been prohibitively expensive to most people, at least unless you owned a major department store. Keep in mind that a lot of people who were making private recordings were making them to sell because Columbia allowed that. Therefore, the money they made for selling those records would have covered the costs of having them made. Mr. Berney, on the other hand, I'm 100% doing this because I want to, and I'm sending out party invitations on a 78 RPM record. So how much would this have cost? Well, just going into the studio and recording a disc would have been a $50 fee just to start. They would have had to pay an extra $10 to set up for someone to speak and 2 musicians. If there were more than 2 musicians, I think I hear 2, but maybe there were 3, that would have cost an additional $15. So just to record this would have been between $60 and $75. That got you 3 test pressing copies. Assuming you wanted to send out more than 3 invitations, now you had to start the pressing process. Each pressing cost an additional $1. Let's say he wanted to send out 50 invitations. That means an extra $50 in addition to the $60 to $75 he already had in this process. So we're looking at a $110 to $125 invitation. Adjusted for inflation, that means that these are $3,000 party invitations. Incidentally, the Belvedere Hotel where this party was going to be held would have been pretty pricey to reserve as well. It was one of the high-class party spots in Baltimore, with parties like the one being described on this record, featuring regionally appropriate exotic animals that were actually brought into the party area. I hope you've enjoyed this look at what has to be one of the greatest party invitations of all time. We'll see you next time on the 78 RPM channel.